What are the powers of the rings of power, aside from invisibility for the One Ring? That's the one we all know. I've often wondered this, I've thought about it over time, and there are hints both of like, oh, the rings had these kinds of powers, or different peoples used them differently, or maybe individual rings had powers different to other rings. It's not quite clear. I recently made a video about the last of the Dwarven rings and how greed for that, dragon-like greed for that on Sauron's part, ironically, fittingly, it directly leads to his downfall, albeit by many removes. So yes, this is a subject of interest to me, suffice to say. I've thought about it recently, and I was thinking again about it for the same thing that inspired me over the Dwarven Ring, which is having The Hobbit read to me. What a wonderful novel, so many things in it that cast different lights on the lore of Middle-earth or whatever, and things like the blades from Gondolin that they find in the Troll Hoard, which so terrify the goblins. But there is nowhere really in all the books, though there's a little bit, there's some strong sections of this in Lord of the Rings, but nowhere where there's so much concentrated depictions of Gandalf using fire. In Overhill and Underhill with the goblins, before, during and after that whole incident, you have so many fiery things that Gandalf does. When they're camping, for instance, he manipulates their smoke rings. He can help set fires, he can manipulate smoke rings, etc. He can cast a light, he can make things explode. He sets sparks places. And of course, you have in The Lord of the Rings, you have his evidently magical fireworks. A firework turns into a dragon, the exact depiction of a dragon which soars down, and you have the light, the unveiled light, as he fights the Balrog. So there are many examples of this fieriness of Gandalf, but Gandalf should not really be all that fiery. Or at least he shouldn't, I would have thought, be so fiery. There is a way in which he might be fiery in himself. If we look at the Silmarillion and the Valakenta, we have mention of him in association with Manwë and Nienna and Varda, and these great powerful archangels or demigods almost, and he's associated with these Valar. So perhaps his Varden association gives him a fieriness. He's most known for being wise and for being often in the house of Nienna, and of her he learned pity and patience. We also learn in the various drafts in Unfinished Tales, which I actually haven't got here, it's upstairs, that he's called in by Manwë. He is, brought in by the king of the Valar, or the archregent, the regent of the Valar anyway, and he is sent as a wizard, as the selection of, the most powerful of the wisest and the best of the Valar. So maybe there's a fiery thing, but there's not very much, and it is pervasive, this fieriness, isn't it? And it's interesting that, when it comes to the matter of the rings of power, he is given a ring, the ring that had been given to Círdan, the lord of the Grey Havens, and I suppose after Gil-galad's death, the lord of Lindon, and all the elves who live in that kind of western coast of Middle-earth. Because the three elven rings, we'll come back to the origins here, but they end up with Círdan and with Elrond and with Galadriel, and Círdan gives his to Gandalf, and he says, pretty much the quote is, have this, and with it you'll kindle the hearts of those in Middle-earth. And this is because Narya, the ring he has, is the ring of fire, and it's revealed fighting the Balrog. And maybe we'll flip that in a moment too. But the point is that this is a ring that has a name. It's the Ring of Fire. The other elven rings are Vilya, the Ring of Air, and which is the senior most ring, the most powerful of the three elven rings, which you can see on this cover. There's the three extra rings. and Nenya, the Ring of Water. Vilio is held by Elrond, and Nenya is held by Galadriel. So there was this thing that what it made me think was, so he's got the fiery ring. It seems to be associated with fire in parts of the book, and Gandalf is constantly using fire magic. Like his magic, and his is the most direct magic. It is not the same kind of magic you see other magic users, including elves, who can make their own musical holograms. I got a video on that. It's a weird thing, but it's true. They can make holograms, basically. It's not necessarily what elves seem to do with their own powers, nor other things that are associated, particularly with Elrond and with Galadriel. So maybe I thought it has something to do with the ring. Now, to take a step back, so the rings are made in Eregion in the Second Age, so before the Last Alliance, before the events of Lord of the Rings, thousands of years before. And they're made by the grandson of the great craftsman, elven craftsman Fëanor, High King of the Noldor, who came to Middle-earth in rebellion against the Valar to seek out the Silmarillion and take them from Melkor Morgoth, the Satan, basically. So Celebrimbor, great craftsman, grandson of the most famous craftsman, really, of all non-gods. And he makes these, and he makes them partly with this guy called Natanatar, the gift giver, who is actually Sauron. Wow. Shock twist. And Sauron makes lots of these, and Sauron in secret makes one ring that's more powerful than all of them, and he obviously puts some of himself in it. Tolkien perhaps drawing on the idea of the Horcrux by famed 19th century author J.K. Rowling. And the idea, anyway, is that he is going to, be able to control these other rings. And now 3 rings escape him when he captures Eregion, and he takes all these. Eregion, by the way, is right next to Moria. And the reason there's a speak, friend, and enter thing is because the elves might want to come and visit them. The dwarves and the elves are friends here. The Noldor had always been closest friends with the dwarves of all the elves, being craftsmen, and friends with Aule back in Valinor, and the dwarves had been made by Aule. So close kinship in a way, intellectual kinship. So Sauron takes all these rings, apart from 3 that escape, and Celebrimbor made alone he never touched, and those are the 3 elven rings. When Sauron puts on the ring, the elves put their rings away, because Sauron's ring is powerful enough that obviously there's some sort of sympathetic magic. It doesn't wholly make sense, given he didn't touch them. There's no sort of tracker, but it's plain by that. It doesn't make sense. I mean, in terms of if you assume that it's simply that Sauron made the rings, he didn't make these rings. But the elves put them away because they feel exposed, and so they are like, okay, we won't wear these. Once Sauron is defeated, it seems like there is more use of these, but the point being the One Ring is lost, and the One Ring never returns to Sauron, indeed. So what we see then is that there's all these rings, and Sauron takes rings, particularly 16 rings, and there are 3 more rings which escape, and those have particular names. The other 16 aren't specifically named anywhere else. We do have this in terms of the 3 that last were made escaped. And Imladris was founded, but Sauron gathered into his hands all the remaining rings of power, but he dealt them out to the other people of Middle-earth, hoping thus to bring under his sway all those that desired secret power beyond the measure of their kind. This is something then the rings can do. This, if you like, the base power is you can do more stuff. It gives you power, obviously. 7 rings he gave to the dwarves, but to men he gave 9, for men improved in the matter, as in others readiest his will. And all those rings that he governed he perverted the more easily, since he had a part in their making, and they were accursed, and they betrayed in the end all those that used them. This is perhaps the thing, is that the elven rings don't seem perverted by Sauron, but perhaps are vulnerable in some sense to him knowing where they are, that sort of thing. The dwarves indeed proved tough and hard to tame. They ill endure the domination of others, and the thoughts of their hearts are hard to fathom, nor can they be turned to shadows. They used their rings only for the getting of wealth, but wrath and an overmastering greed of gold was kindled in their hearts, which evil enough after came to the profit of Sauron. It is said that the foundation of each of the 7 hoards of the dwarf kings of old was a golden ring, but all those hoards long ago were plundered, and the dragons devoured them, and of the 7 rings some were consumed in fire, some Sauron recovered, as I've discussed previously on the channel, to his doom. Men proved easier to ensnare. Those who used the 9 rings became mighty in their day, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of old. They obtained glory and great wealth, yet it turned to their undoing. They had, as it seemed, unending life, yet life became unendurable to them. They could walk if they would, unseen by all eyes in this world beneath the sun, and they could see things in worlds invisible to mortal men. But too often they beheld only the phantoms and delusions of Sauron. And one by one, sooner or later, according to their native strength and to the good or evil of their wills in the beginning, they fell under the thraldom of the ring that they bore and under the domination of the one which was Sauron's, and they became forever invisible save to him that wore the ruling ring, and they entered into the realm of shadows. The Nazgul were they, the ring-wraiths, the enemy's most terrible servants. Darkness went with them, and they cried with the voices of death. So we have a description of the 16 rings given out. We've got the 3 rings separately, we've got the 1 ring, and we've got the 16. Now, interesting, the 16 are not differentiated, actually. This is something I hadn't quite been clear on, but it doesn't seem like the dwarf rings are different rings precisely from the human rings. They might be, because it might be that the way they've been designed was some were designed by Celebrimbor and Atanatar to be, to be good for dwarves to use, and some might have been designed to be good for humans. But the description of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, which is in the Silmarillion, doesn't suggest that. So bear that in mind. They might be different, they might be the same. The implication in that text is they are the same, and I say that because he decides to give more to humans because humans are more easily perverted. Maybe he designed them that way because humans are more easily perverted. There's some interesting things. Basically, the big thing here is that they can give certain powers, and to the dwarves they give the power to accumulate more wealth. But they have the curse and corruption of the dragon greed, basically, which doesn't necessarily need a dwarven ring to activate, it turns out. But because of course, we see Thorin have it with the Arkenstone. But the point is that that's the prevailing corruption. Now, the human rings operate a lot more like the One Ring. Now, it's interesting because Sauron is a Maya. He's a spirit who can take on flesh, whereas humans are flesh. But perhaps that's the similarity, is they are spirit and flesh in a way that dwarves are slightly different. They're first made from stone and then given spirit essentially by God, by Ilúvatar. Anyway, so the One Ring and the 9 rings seem more similar, though the One Ring is much more powerful and dominating. A big thing is it dominates and perverts because it has so much of Sauron, and he makes it alone, and his spirit seems to go into it, and it therefore has that spirit of corruption. But that's what makes him vulnerable to it, because so much of him is caught up in it. The human rings can make you turn invisible, see things that other people can't see, have apparently enduring life, but there's a corruption of basically being driven mad by Sauron, phantoms and delusions, and also falling under the thraldom and dominion of the One, which was Sauron's. They are much, the humans wearing the rings, even though some of them might start with good intentions, interestingly, it's suggested, they all fall under the thrall of Sauron, whereas the dwarves don't. Thrain does not. Thrain in the Necromancer's dungeon, only there ultimately because he wants, Sauron wants his ring. Thrain is plotting in his insanity, to get his grandson to go and conquer Erebor. It seems worth noting that even in that direct contact with the last of the 7, albeit with the senior house of the dwarves, the House of Durin, he can't corrupt that guy. Whereas humans all come under his sway. Anyway, yeah, that's the set of powers we know for those two. Now, that does seem to be partly from the text, though perhaps there's more in Tolkien's mind, from the text of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. That's significantly influenced by the species, and elves and humans and halflings are, particularly humans and halflings and Duradine are the same species. Elves are basically the same. They're biologically the same, it seems. Spiritually different. Dwarves are different, and so are not affected by something that an angel has made, who perhaps, it seems, because angels, Maiar, can breed with humans. There's this with elves. Sorry, we know that in one case. There's this thing about spirit, this metaphysics here that could do with some unpicking, I think. But the point is that dwarves cannot be affected in the same way, and Sauron does not dominate them but they destroy themselves through greed. Humans, the effects are to do with their nature, and that seems more similar to Sauron, hence the powers are similar. Now, the elves, there's no issue of invisibility. The rings are invisible, it seems. Frodo sees that Galadriel has a ring, but Sam sees a star upon her finger. Sees a star through her fingers, rather. So that's what happens in Lorien. There's a weird glimmer, but it's not an obvious ring. There's some way in which they can maybe hide themselves. Gandalf seems to be able to hide the fact he has a ring. So there's a hiding of themselves, but not of... here's the point. The One Ring. Someone else wears the One Ring who is not a human, is not like that, and so is not turned to spirit like the Maker Sauron. And that's Tom Bombadil. This is a Bombadilian point, surely, about the identity of Tom Bombadil, whatever it is. I've got videos on that and on Goldberry. But the point is that Bombadil doesn't get changed at all, and it seems pretty clear it's because it's a weird one. It's not associated with the metaphysics of whether or not he has he has a soul or age or something, but just because he doesn't want anything else. He is already the master. He doesn't need to be master of anything, and so nothing in the ring. It's interesting, isn't it, that at some level his purity renders the ring inert, not him inert, but the ring inert. There's no power it can offer him. But the 3 elven rings can hide themselves, but not the wearer, because Galadriel is wearing it and isn't invisible. But they might have some power of protection. We'll get to that. They are named for elements, air, fire, and water, and they seem to... There's an argument, I think, that they give their users powers those users wouldn't otherwise have. And it's debatable in each case. We know these are powerful rings. If they're rings of power but they don't do anything, then it seems a tough sell to call them rings of power. Now, I should say we know one power of the 3. Sauron most desired to possess, of all the elven rings, because all the others are elven rings, Sauron most desired to possess 3, for those who had them in their keeping could ward off the decays of time and postpone the weariness of the world. So we do have one power, which is that things do not age and decay. And I suppose we might see this most obviously in the case of Lorien and Galadriel, which becomes a bit sad and depressing once Galadriel leaves. The Celeborn stays on there for a while. It becomes sad and depressing, or at least more so, relatively speaking, because it's not being preserved by Nenya. Nenya in some way keeps this forest young, as if in the youth of the world, beautiful. Now it's weird because Galadriel turns up there in the 2nd or 3rd age. Unfinished Tales has the quite complicated textual history of Tolkien trying to work this out, because which gives us some of the best information we have on the 2nd Age, even though there's direct contradictions between the Galadriel stories. Who does she take it over from? Does her son rule it and she takes it over? Is it a different Sylvan line associated with Dol Amroth late as well? Who knows? But the main point is that it's not like she's there at the beginning of the 1st Age. She does have the training Melian the Maya in Doriath gave her. She's a great gardener. But it's hard to see why you'd need the ring just to grow, if you could just do it anyway and then it's preserved. It's not preserved from a very old age, it's preserved from, relatively speaking, Galadriel, recent at time for Galadriel. So it's hard to say. But I wonder whether the particular beauty and wonder of Lorien then is not simply the preservation, the slowing down of time. Like, I'm so glad these Malon trees don't die in their normal time after 5 years, but live thousands of years. I don't think that's what's going on chiefly. But perhaps there's something where, they are grown. The growing of things is aided by Nenya. And Nenya's the Ring of Water, so maybe there's a link there. Narya does feel easy because we have Maiar do have powers sometimes, or at least have evident powers sometimes. Though taking on flesh seems to cloak it. The Maiar don't have perfect memories. Radagast seems to be able to speak to animals, for instance, one. Is he one of Yavanna's? I'm trying to remember without the book next to me. Is he one of Yavanna's Maya, and Sauron can shape change in the Silmarillion. He can become a werewolf. So maybe Aloran Mithrandir just has these powers, but it does seem a bit too good to be true, based on specifically how often that image of fire comes associated with him, and Círdan's giving of the Ring of Fire to rekindle the hearts of those who falter in Middle Earth. Now, if we go to the bridge of Khazad Dûm, here we go. The dark figure, streaming with fire, raced toward them. The orcs yelled and poured over the stone gangways. Then Boromir raised his horn and blew. Loud the challenge rang and bellowed like the shout of many throats under the cavernous roof. For a moment the orcs quailed and the fiery shadow halted. Then the echoes died as suddenly as a flame blown out by a dark wind, and the enemy advanced again. "Over the bridge!" cried Gandalf, recalling his strength. "Fly! This is a foe beyond any of you. I must hold the narrow way. Fly!" Aragorn and Boromir did not heed the command, but still held their ground, side by side, behind Gandalf at the far end of the bridge. The others halted just within the doorway at the hall's end, and turned, unable to leave their leader to face the enemy alone. The Balrog reached the bridge. Gandalf stood in the middle of the span, leaning on his left hand, on the staff in his left hand, but in his other hand, Glamdring gleamed, cold and white. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached like two vast wings. It raised the whip, and the thongs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils, but Gandalf stood firm. "You cannot pass," he said. The orc stood still, and a dead silence fell. "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Adun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but the darkness grew. It stepped forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself up to its great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But still Gandalf could be seen, glimmering in the gloom. He seemed small and altogether alone, grey and bent like a wizened tree before the onset of the storm. From out of the shadow a red sword leaped flaming. Glamdring glittered white in answer. There was a ringing clash and a stab of white fire. The Balrog fell back, and its sword flew up in molten fragments. The wizard swayed on the bridge, stepped back a pace, and then again stood still. "You cannot pass," he said. With a bound, the Balrog leaped full upon the bridge. Its whip whirled and hissed. "He cannot stand alone," cried Aragorn suddenly, and ran back along the bridge. "Elendil," he shouted, "I am with you, Gandalf." "Gondor!" cried Boromir, and leaped after him. At that moment, Gandalf lifted his staff, and crying aloud, he smote the bridge before him. The staff broke asunder and fell from his hand. A blinding sheet of white flame sprang up. The bridge cracked. Right at the Balrog's feet it broke, and the stone upon which it stood crashed into the gulf, while the rest remained, poised, quivering like a tongue of rock thrust out into emptiness. With a terrible cry, the Balrog fell forward, and its shadow plunged down and vanished. But even as it swung its whip, and the thongs lashed and curled about the wizard's knee, dragging him to the brink. He staggered and fell, grasped vainly at the stone, and slid into the abyss. "Fly, you fools," he cried, and was gone. So, isn't that's interesting, right? What he says at a point where he suddenly is, almost he's not visibly foreign. He's a small wizened grey figure, and yet he says he's a servant of the secret flame, the secret fire, and he has a wielder of the flame of Anor. Those are two specifically interesting claims, and the language, the grammar here matters. He also smashes his staff onto the bridge. The staff breaks. A blinding sheet of flame springs up. It's something in the staff, which, given the light he can use, they can light his staff. It seems, I think, clear that this is the ring, right? The ring of fire. So interesting that he associates the two, of course. "I am a servant to the secret fire, The secret fire here is, I think, Erioluvatar. And ether, remember, the heavenly fire in medieval and ancient understandings of elements, is often seen as a divine element, particularly by the Stoics. Wielder of the flame of Anor. So I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. Anor is the sun. So he's wielding the sun in some way. There is an element involved here, which is not the same thing as the secret fire. The secret fire, he doesn't serve the sun, he serves God. And so the two are separate, but he rhetorically connects the two. And then we see that the fire in the Balrog dies, but the darkness grows. Isn't that? And he declares him to be shadow. You cannot pass. He opposes shadow with fire. And there is a kind of a bunch of thematic fittingnesses here, which are really enjoyable, but also do suggest something about the ring. That the ring he bears is important here. It, in some way, maybe it's particularly fitting it's given to him to warm people, the light of the sun. That I think the flame of Anor here is the ring. I think that most people think that, don't they? And I think he is able to oppose this creature of shadow and fake fire, essentially. He becomes less fiery because Gandalf represents true fire, the fire of the sun. So yeah, maybe in that case, and the white flame, which is not the flame of the sun necessarily, but the white flame which it comes from the smashing of the staff and breaks the bridge of Khazad-dûm. So, what can we draw from that? Well, apart from the suggestion that yes, it's the flame of Anor, and it has these particular powers of seeming to make Gandalf more fiery in some way and smashing the bridge with fire, fire explosion. Maybe also that it, in some way, it is a reflection of the craft of the Silmarils. In fact, that's an attractive theory. Feanor crafts the Silmarils to capture the light of the two trees, and Celebrimbor crafts the three on his own, and one seems to be called the Flame of Anor, and it is a ring of fire. And so perhaps you have the other two rings are capturing, in the same way the Silmarils capture the light of the trees, the three rings capture in some way natural elements, and that's a gift of the elves. In which case it makes sense that Narya is associated with the character who has so much firepower. Boom, boom. Now let's go. The others are harder. As I say, Nenya, the ring of water. What water? Well, water, I guess, is closely associated with Ulmo, the god who is most friendly towards Middle-earth in many ways, and whose water has a power that repels Sauron. Now, interesting, this is not the water that gets used to destroy servants of Sauron, and we'll touch on that. But again, Nenya perhaps you can associate with growth. You can associate with the watery boundaries of Lorien and its safety and security. And as well as the generic, it stays, it does not fade, the beauty does not fade. And then Elrond has Vilya, the chief of the three. Fitting as his, this is the thing, Galadriel is not actually the chief of the Noldor in Middle-earth, though she is comfortably the oldest and, the most powerful in most respects. Elrond is the unnamed successor, as it were, to Gil-galad. There is no Noldor High King, but the son of Eärendil, who bears the Ring of Adamant, the senior of the three rings, he is, who fought alongside Isildur at the battles of the Last Alliance and the War of the Last Alliance. Yeah, he has that. Now, there's two things that come to mind. And what the Ring of Air captures, the Ring of Fire seems to capture the sun, perhaps, in some way, or represent the sun, the flame of Anor. Now, the Ring of Air, Ithiel, moon, is not associated, I think, terribly linguistically with air, but perhaps the more knowledgeable, I have some Lord of the Rings linguistics people here, drop them in the comments. But certainly, whatever it is, air can be associated certainly with confusion, the airy zone. If you read your Silver Chair, not that Tolkien had at this point or would have necessarily liked it, but he knows the same references. The airy zone beneath the moon is wet and thick and confusing. The layer in which the moon is. This again in pre-modern cosmology. So air is, but air is also, of course, where Eärendil flies with the Silmaril that's in the air. He flies across the sky with the Silmaril rescued from destruction. So perhaps there we have there's something it's capturing about the air, perhaps. But what we know it does is what we know about Elrond and Rivendell, not what we know Villiers does, is he can control water. Elves can't usually control elements, as far as I can ever remember, and it's particularly hard to get to. That's Vega, and it's Vega because it could just be very well hidden. Certainly, it is very well hidden. We must not miss the road, Gandalf says, or we shall be done for, he said. We need food for one thing and rest in reasonable safety. Also, it's very necessary to tackle the Misty Mountains by the proper path, or else you'll get lost in them and have to come back and start at the beginning again if ever you get back at all. They asked him what he was making for, and he answered, You are come to the very edge of the wild, as some of you may know. Hidden somewhere ahead of us is the fair valley of Rivendell, where Elrond lives in the last homely house. I send a message by my friends, and we are expected. So it's hidden. It's a hidden place. And there's the thing where it's just very hard to find. Bilbo was astonished. Very wide land. The only path was marked with white stones, some which were small, others were half covered with moss or heather. Even guided by Gandalf, who seems to know way about pretty well. It's tough to find your way there. And I wonder if that is Villiers. I don't think there's any direct evidence for it, particularly. I mean, let's turn to... I suppose that from the Ford of Bruin, and we don't have a point of view, do we? We skipped the Council of Elrond, I think. We'll check that. But the other thing is that he controlled the Fords of Bruin. And so is it that Villiers in some way, as well as, it makes a very nice place, quite like this Rivendell place. It also gives us, it gives Elrond protection in terms of hiding, much like we might think that, hiding by making it confusing to find rather than protecting it via having ulmotic waters. I don't know. I'm very much speculating and making that one up, so don't take me too seriously there. Because it's Frodo's point of view, we don't get any description of the approach to Rivendell, just to the Ford of Bruinen. And control over local elements to destroy enemies. It's Vega. I think Narya is very clear what its powers are. I think the 7 and the 9 are very clear. The 1 seems very clear in terms of we know what it does for Frodo, and we know what from the Rings of Power in the Third Age what it seems to be able to do for Sauron. He can use it to influence other rings, a bit like the Palantirs being sympathetic, but even more so, and much more flexible. The other 2 of the 3 are Vega, but I think of the idea that Imladris is hidden and safe in the wilderness, in a dangerous place that's dangerous through the Second Age and the Third Age against Sauron and against the Witch King. It's in danger, but it does not fall. It's hidden and safe, and the water control. That seems to me that's not Elrond, but the ring. And for Lorien, the as much as Galadriel is a great gardener, and perhaps you can then say it's preserving her gardening skill. Perhaps the water surrounding it, protecting it, that seems to make sense to me, and the sheer abundance of life there. Those 2 things seem to me to be Nenya, the ring. Anyway, that's my theories on the rings, inspired by thinking about the Elven rings particularly. I'd love to hear your theories about the powers of the rings, if there is any difference between categories of ring. What other, I guess, can we stick a ring on an eagle or an ent and find out what they do? I don't know. That'd be interesting if we can get a ring the right size. Tell me your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you next time.